Live.
Hi, good morning. I would like to welcome you today at this session on paradox of resilience in the context of urban and rural areas. I'm going to share here my screen so we can see the program for today. Sorry, I don't know if you can see my screen right now.
No, not yet.
Okay. No. Somehow my computer got very slow.
Now I can see it.
Yeah. So first, we're going to start with Christian Kuhlicke, who is organizing the session together with me. And he will give an overview of some paradoxes of resilience that that exist. Then Jana Blaha from Constance University, she will talk about some examples of how public agencies can actually not enhance urban resilience, but create problems towards it. Then Rafael Karutz will show an example in India of how rural-urban migration can decrease the risk of, not the risk, but the resilience to floods while people migrate to urban regions. Then Maria Partidario and Isabel will provide us an interesting example in the Lisbon metropolitan area. And finally, Thomas Thaler will explain us a little bit of how some flood risk management policies can encourage inequalities. And after each talk, so each talk it will take 10 minutes, and we have 5 minutes for discussion. And in the end of the session, we expect to have an open discussion with some guiding questions. So, Christian, the floor is yours. I want to end my, sorry.
So I can, oh no, now I have again this problem. I had this yesterday already. I can't share my screen too easily.
I can also share for you if...
It's not working here. I had the same. Yeah, welcome to the Walrus. I sent you my current presentation, Mariana, okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
And then you can share this to me, share for me.
Yeah.
I just send it.
Okay, I'm checking.
So I can talk a little bit. So welcome everyone. I'm really glad that you are here. Also that we are in a small group. I am Christian. I work here in Leipzig. I'm sitting now at home, as most of you do. I'm here at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, Department of Urban and Environmental Sociology. And I'm also a professor at the University of Potsdam with an emphasis on environmental risks and sustainability. I have a long-term interest in resilience, and I'm still trying to get a grasp on it. So what I present today is a little bit of my attempt to get a grasp on it. And I'm really glad that you responded to the call, or that you kind of were attributed to this session without your so to say, or beyond your influence. But I think the topic of that session is so broad that everyone fits in here. So the idea is that we exchange a little bit on your presentations, but perhaps we can also, in the end, think about joint future activities. Therefore, I'm quite happy that we are a rather small group. So perhaps we find a common interest, a shared interest, where we say, okay, let's put this forward. We come from very different backgrounds, and your presentations are covering a really broad field. So I think that is something we could potentially explore. So thank you very much for being here on this Friday morning. What I present now in 10 minutes is kind of my reading of the literature published on resilience with a focus on cities. And you will see I do this with a rather broad brush. I beg for your apologies in advance already that I do this with a very broad brush. But this might also perhaps be helpful to think about where to go in the future. I would like to start with outlining 3 waves of resilience studies. Mariana, kannst du klicken? So there are 3 waves, and 2 of the waves I think are quite well, you can describe them quite well. The 3rd wave is still in the making, I would say, and it's not yet clear where this entire discussion on resilient cities or urban-rural interfaces, on what they imply for the resilience of inhabitants, but also of ecosystem and infrastructures. I think what is apparent is there's kind of a first wave of resilience studies, and I would call that the right side of resilience. So initially in the first publications, both on resilience, particularly if they come from sociology, but also increasingly now with an emphasis on resilient cities, is kind of they embrace the idea of resilience quite openly and said, well, this way of thinking is really advantage for us, advantage for city planner and also for scientists thinking about how to increase the ability of cities to cope with threats. So on the one hand, there's this increasing perception that cities are exposed to various threats, including the consequences of climate change, terrorist strikes, pandemics, financial shocks, and so on and so forth. And resilience, the idea of resilience is kind of an idea of how to organize, if you like, as urban systems, of becoming more robust, more adaptive, to cope with these kind of external shocks. So resilience is in this way kind of a way of thinking. It's kind of, you probably know many different examples. And I thought it, Maria, could you click? I just would like to provide one example of this first wave of so to say, of resilience studies. It's the Bright Resilient Cities. It's a paper by Miro and Stoltz. And kind of it relies on different ideas coming from sociology, but also from psychology, on how to make resilient or cities more resilient. So they need to be robust, the systems need to be flexible, it should be inclusive, there should be kind of a mechanism of learning, of adaptability. Ideally, the resilient cities are decentral, they have redundant systems, so if one system collapses, you have a second system that can jump in. Decision-making process should be transparent and everything should be integrative. So I think that is kind of a, if you like, a checklist or some parameters that can almost lead to kind of an assessment, if you like, of what are the characteristics of a resilient cities. And I bet, I mean, there are many different examples, and this is just one. And I think that is becoming part of the discussion. How can we make resilient cities? What are the key characteristics of resilient cities? How can we put that into an indicator? Can we transform this in indicators? What kind of data do we need to kind of assess and monitor the way of cities becoming more resilient? And there are many different initiatives that also are more active on the policy level. Mariana? And at the same time, there's an increasing, particularly in the social science, and if you like, in the more critical social science, that is saying, hey, wait a second, what's happening here? It's kind of a very powerful ideology that is suddenly appearing here on the surface, and that ideology, I mean, it comes from ecology. So, and it ignores kind of some of the more long-lasting debates, particularly in the social science, centerings of notions of social justice, social vulnerability, inequality, but also on governmentality that are not taken up, so to say, and not critically reflected by this first wave of resilient studies. So what does it actually imply if suddenly we allow resilience to become a very powerful way of thinking through which urban societies, but also societies in rural areas, are governed? Yeah. So what does that imply actually? Could you click? And there are some really nice papers that try to unravel that a little bit and say, and think about what does it imply if a threat is suddenly be naturalized again. I mean, one of the strengths of social vulnerability, the concept was that it was about denaturalizing climate events. In the sense, it's not about hydrology, it's not about meteorology, it's not about seismology alone. It's also about how societies are structured and how these structures produce certain patterns of inequality that translate into specific structures or patterns of vulnerability. And also this entire discussion is largely decoupled from political discussion, and it can also lead to a responsibilization of individuals. So there are many, so to say, unintended consequences or very problematic assumptions underpinning that idea of resilience. So for me, this is kind of the second wave, if you like. It's a critical backlash, and it highlights some of the more long-lasting debates within the social sciences and how they can be linked, complement, or even severely criticize the very idea of making resilient or making cities resilient. And what I would like to propose now, Mariana, you could click perhaps, whether there's something like a third wave. And therefore, I'm really happy that you are participating here, that tries to make sense of kind of the first wave and the second wave and what we actually are observing or will observing. And I think the idea of paradoxes might be one way of putting many different empirical examples, but also many different ways of looking at how societies, so to say, become more resilient in the long term, and what this implies actually on the ground. So I thought it's just fair if I unravel my understanding of paradox, because if you look at the literature on paradoxes, usually it's a great title, but if you then go deeper into the articles, they only rarely define what they actually mean by paradox. And within philosophy and also in other economics, there's a long-lasting debates about paradoxes. So the understanding of paradox that I propose, or that we propose here, is a little bit more grounded in social theory or in social science debates. Some of them stemming from sociology. And as you will see, there's a clear process behind the paradox idea. So initially, it's kind of that a societal challenge is perceived as relevant, and it is addressed through specific strategies, measures, and practices in order to solve this problem. Yeah. And then over time, so to say, that strategy results in positive, if you like, impacts. So the problem actually becomes solved. But at the same time, it leads to unintended side effects, which are increasingly becoming apparent, which are noticed, and then the side effects are considered as problematic too, at least by some group of actors. Yeah. And then these side effects, they can become a part of, so to say, a part of social conflicts and resistance, which can arise, so to say, from these side effects, which undermine, so to say, in the long term, the trust in relevant actors and lead to really severe conflicts among different actors. So paradox means that it's paradoxically that a problem is solved, and that leads to unintended side effects, which leads to new conflicts and new undesired outcomes. I think that is kind of the key idea that I would like to put forward, Mariana, and I would like to give some quick examples. I have a hobby of collecting paradoxes within this field of research, so I'm really looking forward to your contributions. I think the first one is kind of a classic. It's the safety paradox. So you probably know this, the levy effect. So if you protect citizens quite well through levies, in the long run, it will not to a decrease of vulnerability, but in the long run, it leads to an increase of damage potential because more and more people build there, more infrastructure is built there. And then if you have an event that overtops, so to say, the levies, the effects are disastrous. So you see that a problem is solved, but leads to new problems. Mariana? The second paradox is the effectiveness paradox. So we can observe this a little bit in Germany now in these COVID times, an extremely well operating DRR system that is extremely effective in, so to say, mitigating the consequences of a crisis lead in the long run there to that, so to say, this problem becomes, so to say, ignored, and awareness about the problem is decreasing and knowledge about the problem is decreasing. And so to say, people tend to say, well, you don't have a problem here, but the problem is still existent, but it seems to be mitigated, it seems to be managed well. So this is the effectiveness paradox. Mariana? Then I think also the quick fix paradox. So particularly if you think about resilience, it tends to solve problem on the surface. So it doesn't address the root causes. Yeah. You think about, so to say, if you think about, there are some interesting, more recent studies on saying, well, if people are very well able to cope with flood events, they tend to downplay the long-term consequences of climate change, and they also tend to be less interested in be involved in mitigation activities with regard to climate change, because they have the impression that the consequences of climate change can be solved through adaptation. Mariana? And then another paradox, what I call the co-benefit paradox, is you see in many areas where nature-based solutions are implemented, leading to a greening of urban neighborhoods, so to say. So it's not just reducing the risk of heat effects, for instance, or of flooding in neighborhoods through nature-based solution, but it's also kind of an upgrading of these neighborhoods, which leads to increasing prices that need to be covered through rents, because the neighborhood becomes more attractive. So you have outmigration or forced outmigration, more or less, of residents that can no longer afford to live there because this neighborhood has become so attractive to live there. Mariana? So these are just some initial examples, and I think as we go through your presentations, and even if you haven't thought yet that you're talking of paradoxes, perhaps we come to a conclusion that actually we all talk a little bit about paradoxes at least. So what kind of, so the first guiding question is, what kind of implication can arise from the transition towards resilience in urban rural planning and development? This is more or less kind of a first kind of very generic question. Perhaps we managed to talk a little bit more about what are some of the paradoxes with respect to resilience and how should these paradoxes be dealt with. And what does this actually mean for the operationalization of resilience, and how to monitor or how to evaluate, so to say, the resilience of cities, if increasing resilience can also lead to unintended side effects. And how do we move on, so to say, although, so to say, it's a challenging topic, and how to kind of don't lose out of sight the idea that enhancing resilience is not necessarily a bad thing. So this is, I think, what I wanted to say at the beginning. Thanks for your listening, and good luck. And I mean good luck basically not with regard to the content, but with regard to the technicalities of presenting. And thanks, Mariana.
Thank you. So now, do any of you have any question or any comment or suggestion for Christian?
Can I ask a quick one? All right, Christian, great. That was really, really good. Question: would you consider the wicked questions also as part of paradox? Because that would be slightly different from your definition of paradox.
No, I don't. It depends on how you divide. You mean wicked problems?
Wicked problems in terms of, the same situation. You can try to solve it, but at the same time you cannot. So it's a bit different from how you define the paradox, because you're not able to solve it like in a linear way
Maria, I don't have a quick answer to this.
That's okay.
So I think what is interesting as an exercise is to kind of, position these different contexts next to each other and think and say, where are they different? Where do they overlap? And what does this imply for future research? I think that's the more interesting question. I think I understand your question in this direction. So I'm happy to exchange on neighboring concepts that actually seem to point in a similar direction, but take a slightly different edge at it.
Slightly different, yeah. It's not exactly the same, but it's slightly different. It ends up in the same issue, in the same problem that you placed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Christian. I got paradox is definitely not my my research field, but I got an idea like how to really test this and design some experiments to try to prove if they exist or not. I think it will be interesting exercise.
Yeah.
So
I switch off now. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we move to the second presentation from Jana Blaha.
Should I start sharing?
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. Do you see the presentation? Perfect. Well, then I think you can still say good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here and present my topic to you. So shortly about me, maybe. I'm a PhD student at the University of Constance, and I'm also working in the Kuhlicke project on black swans in public administration, which is about serious organizational failures. So I'm not that much talking about these extreme cases, but it of course informs my view also for this presentation. And I'm especially interested in the role that public agencies or public administration in general plays in these efforts to increase urban resilience, and how different perspective on these actors exist. And my argument is basically that broadening our perspective on the role that they can actually help to better understand how they sometimes act as barriers and sometimes as enablers. So to start us off with, because I thought I include a little definition again about disaster risk management, which is basically the process that I'm mainly talking about. So in the literature on how communities or societies are dealing with disasters, there has been a general shift of talking more about how we can manage disaster risk than just reacting to disaster events. And in this shift, I think the link with strengthening resilience, so the link between the disaster risk literature and the literature on resilience has actually become stronger, because this focus has shifted more on this and on this continuous activities of trying to reduce disaster risk. And I think this is kind of, I was thinking if you can make comparison to these two waves, that maybe in the shift to the second wave, you could say that we have now, there was this intent to try to better define the new objectives of disaster risk management and what this implies for actually of the goals of a society when trying to deal with disasters. And I think as I'm reading the literature on urban resilience and also disaster risk management, the objectives are pretty clear now. And research, nothing is never totally clear, but we have a better grasp of them now. And the new principal challenge, in a sense, that has been identified by various authors is now how we can actually implement these new policies. So the implementation process has become more important, and focus has shifted towards the key barriers and enablers in this project. And me as a public administration researcher, when I hear people talking about implementation, I am thinking immediately about, in this context, public agencies and public administrations are becoming more important as well, because they are often, or still often, the institutions that actually have to implement these policies, and that and I'm aware that there are discussions now that there's a shift of responsibility from public to private institutions and to maybe more individual responsibilities. But I think that everybody would agree that these public institutions still play a crucial role in implementing disaster risk reduction policies and resilience policies on the ground. So I think, or the argument that I want to make is that I think we can use this renewed attention to the implementation process to actually integrate more insights from classical public administration research and organizational research in general to better understand the role that these institutions play in implementing the policies, and to better understand maybe cases where we think that certain institutions should make a community more resilient, but when we're actually looking at what is happening, what we are expecting is happening is not happening. This sounds very theoretical now. I hope it becomes clearer in my practical example then. But before going into this new direction, I just want to shortly touch on how public administration is currently still often seen in this context, because I think it is recognized that public administration are important for implementing BRR and resilience policies, but they're still often defined or characterized as structural barriers. So what do I mean by this? I have this quote, I think that summarizes the argument quite well that I'm referring to, which is from an editorial on like the current challenges on implementing urban resilience, where the authors say that how to best restructure the activities of municipal authorities to break down silos that protect fields of expertise in traditional bureaucratic setting and move towards horizontal integration and long-term planning is perhaps the key task in developing overall city resilience. So what is interesting for me here is, or what the things that I'm picking up in this quote is that they're talking about restructuring and about these traditional bureaucratic settings. So I think this still harks back a little bit to the stereotypes of public administration as these very hierarchical, slow, maybe and not flexible institutions that act, due to the way they are structured, act as barriers to implementing policies to increase the resilience in cities, and to increase the resilience in cities. And I think this is so I think there is this structural focus because of the challenges that were identified first, which these policies are supposed to solve. So community resilience emerged as the larger push towards more collaborative and participatory government approaches that were considered to be better suited to address modern risk in comparison to the traditional hierarchical models. So it was said that we have these new challenges that emerged due to so this is a very broad brush argument as well. So we have these new challenges that emerged due to our modern society being more interconnected, being more complex, being more uncertain, and the old structures that we had to resolve the problems of societies are not working anymore. And this is why we need to restructure them to be able to address these challenges. And so this is why there's this focus on structure as well when we're talking about public administration, I think. And I don't want to say, so the argument that I want to make is not to say that this is the wrong approach in any way. I think there were a lot of advances through this particular lens, but now that we're talking about implementation, I think it is helpful to broaden our view and also look at public administration only as these structures of cooperation that, if you just restructure them, can then suddenly be enablers, but also look at public agencies as political institutions in which power consideration are actually can play an important role as incentives for decision makers. So I think I will skip this part and go straight into the example, I think, to show what I mean. So what I mean is, so what I want to say is that when we're looking at public administration and how public administration can help or be a barrier to policies to increase resilience, then we might actually lose some aspects of the role that public administration plays in this process. So the example that I have is actually, that was the case that my master thesis, which is the case of the Argentinian city of La Plata, and where there was a big disaster in or a flooding event with disastrous consequences in 2013. And then when trying to understand the causes for this event, what was identified was that there was that researchers actually had recommended that there was a need of more risk-sensitive land planning policies. So that, for example, that there were development and in areas where the risk for flooding was high, and the municipal bodies actually received this information, but they didn't act on it. And the paradox maybe now that can be identified in this case is that they were, in this case, the municipal government and the administrative bodies as well were actually considered as very modern and as very modern and as very progressive, in the sense that they try to integrate more of these collaborative and participatory approaches. So they try to change the structure, the bureaucratic structure, to which should, in this very structural perspective, actually increase resilience. But in this case, it didn't really have a big impact on making the community more resilient. And one of the reasons for that was that this open format of this, so they introduced a planning body which was supposed to include more stakeholders in the community, so to include private actors and also interest group like affected people that were affected by the flooding. But their voices weren't really heard, because in this open format, actually allowed powerful actors in the community to gain more influence on the municipal administration, which in consequences led to less risk-sensitive land planning policies. So the structural change that was supposed to increase resilience in the city actually had the opposite effect in this case of the city of La Plata. I hope that was my point came across. If not, you can ask another question. And with this, I think I'm going straight to my conclusion. So the point that I want to make is that when talking about disaster risk challenges for urban communities, it is tempting to fall in, and when we're talking about public administration and the role it plays for these challenges, it is tempting to fall into this stereotypical thinking, in a sense that, oh, public administration is a barrier because it is so slow, and the way it is structured hinders approaches that would promote more resilience. But the point that I want to make is that there's only thinking this far is actually not taking into account that public administration has a lot of other dimensions that can interact negatively with approaches that only try to think about how to restructure public administration, or that can have other consequences and other unintended consequences of policies. And these cannot be just designed away, but just recognizing this political dimension of public administration can actually help to better manage potential tensions, in addition to managing these new challenges that were identified before. So with that, I think I'm ready. Thank you for listening. And I hope I didn't go over the time too much.
Thank you, Jana, for this interesting presentation. It's actually is maybe another paradox for Christian to add in his list. So the participation paradox, because by including this process, some voices get stronger and can push their own agendas. Does anyone have any question to Jana? We have a slight delay from what is happening in the chat to our live presentation, so maybe some questions will come up later. So I would suggest we can gather then for the end of the discussion, or I don't know if you would like to answer the question we got already, Christian, now.
You mean from the chat?
Yeah, the thing is, there's a delay of 1 minute, and
yeah.
Yeah, but we actually now have a question from the chat regarding your talk, Jana. So if you want
that's
to,
perfect.
Jana should go on, I think. Let's start with
Yeah.
Jana. Yeah.
okay,
Perfect.
I'll just read out the question. Is resilience measured only by the flooding? In this example, one may think of various other ways in which the municipality increased resilience. What is resilience in your study?
Yeah, that's a great addition. So of course, I only focused on a very specific aspect of managing disaster risk and increasing resilience, because I wanted to get to this paradox, or to this this point where politics plays a role. And in my example, so resilience is not only so in my example, I'm only taking a slice of what resilience actually means in this case, because this was the thing I was most interested in. But I would say that how I would define resilience in this example is not as an aspect of a specific system or a specific community, or as a structural aspect of a specific system, but more as something that emerges in the context of what is actually happening. So that emerges due to the political pressures that exist in this specific case, that emerges due to what is the social aspect. So of course, resilience can also refer to the individual level, but here I'm referring to resilience of the community as a whole, which includes far more than this. But I think it's like in this presentation, I only had a very limited view of one aspect of what resilience can mean. But I think that this political aspect that I focused on can cross over to many other aspects as well, where resilience is important. Now, I was confusing in the end, but I hope that I got my point across. So it's just I realized that it's a very limited view of resilience that I employed in this talk, and I think it's you should have a more comprehensive definition if you're trying to understand the community resilience for the whole community. But in this talk, I only wanted to show that how politics can sometimes undermine specific efforts to increase resilience in specific circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much, Jana. So later you can also reply to the comments in the chat or something like this. Now I would like to move on to the next presentation, so by Rafael.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear us? Okay. So, yes, thanks, and also for the good introduction, Christian, because I'm Christine, my colleague that will present today with me, and we're already doing the presentation. We're discussing a little bit where our empirical findings fit in, and this will be very, very interesting to discuss later, I think. So what we will present today are first insights from a study on Pune, India, where we saw that the city is growing rapidly and migration is the main contributor to that growth. And we wondered, where do the people come from and why do they come to the city? And we will show some empirical results on that, and also then come to the question of vulnerability and a little bit resilience, since this is the topic of our session today. And I think we will also have some interesting paradoxes for your collection, Christian. I think we'll start with the context, and I can.
First of all, we wanted to give you some background information on migration in India as a whole. And here we're providing you with some insights from our census data analysis. And on the right-hand side, you can see the census definition of a migrant, so we're all on the same page here. And in this graph, you can see the temporal development of the number of total migrants from 1991 to 2011 for India and Maharashtra. And Maharashtra is the state where our focus location is located in. And when I'm talking about total migrants, what I mean is inter- and intrastate migrants. And as you can see here, you can see a steady and continuous increase of the total migrants numbers. And now we'll move on to the next slide. Here we took a specific look at the most recent census period, which is 2011. And here you can see that Maharashtra had the largest number of migrants, namely 57 million. And then we also wanted to take a deeper look at where are these migrants actually going to within Maharashtra. And here we got the results that the district of Pune received the largest share of migrants, namely 11%. And with these two maps, we simply wanted to show that Maharashtra within India plays a big role when explaining migration patterns, and the district of Pune within Maharashtra. And since we're using different data sets, we simply wanted to discuss them. And for your information, you can always see at the top of the slide which data set we're talking about. So as I just mentioned, we have the census data set. Then we also have the household survey, and this is a general sample of Pune's households aiming at representativeness. And this was conducted as part of the FUSE project. And here a random household selection with predefined spatial and socioeconomic clusters took place. Then we also have the migration subsample, which is part of the household survey. And here only the interviews with a migration background are included. Then we also have the interview data set, and here Raphael conducted 24 interviews at targeted slums, and they all had a migration background and a rural migration origin. And now we want to take a specific look at the housing type and migration origin of the migration subsample. And here we differentiated between 3 different housing types or categories, namely formal urban, slums, and townships. And you can also see the migration origin for each of them. And township can also be understood as a gated community. I think this term is more familiar to you probably. When you take a look at the formal urban, you can see that the migration origin is quite equal. When you take a look at the township, you can see that the majority of the migrants actually have an urban background. And when you take a look at the slums, you can see a strong preference towards migrants with a rural origin. And now we want to move on to the reasons for migration by using the data from the migration sample. And here again, you can see the 3 housing categories: formal urban, township, and slums, and 4 different reasons categories: environmental, economic, living conditions, and family and other. And again, we are differentiating between an urban and a rural background. And overall, you can see that it is mainly the economic and family and other reasons which seem to be playing the largest role in the decision-making process when it comes to migration. At the same time, you can also detect differences between the housing categories. For example, formal urban and township are more similar compared to the reasons that were stated by migrants in the slums. Furthermore, you can also detect differences between the migration origins. And here I want you to take a specific look at the slums, because here the reasons differ the strongest. When you take a look at migrants in the slum with a rural origin, you can see that it is mainly the economic and also the housing reasons which seem to be playing a larger role compared to the migrants in slum with an urban background. And then also at the same time, for the migrants in the slums with a rural origin, the share of environmental reasons seems to be the largest with 4%. And due to this, we want to take a specific look at migrants in slum with a rural origin. And now I'll pass it on to Raphael.
Yes, thanks. So yeah, let's zoom in a bit on that subgroup. So what Anne-Christine showed were basically groups of reasons that we have here: environmental, economic, living conditions, and so on. But those groups consist of concrete reasons that we asked for in the household survey. And we gave the respondents a chance to give up to 3 reasons for why they migrated. And we see here in the group family and other reasons that really family reasons, especially a marriage, but also the movement with the household, for example, as kids, are the dominant reasons here, but also education plays a role. Let us look at the interviews that I did then. Actually, they confirmed this. Many interviewees explained how they married and after marriage directly went to the city. Here's one quote where the respondent said that she got married in the village. My husband took me with him here. Or then an education quote. My husband used to stay in Pune with his grandparents for studies in school, since in the village there was not much education. So not a very surprising result on the family and other reason group. This changes when we look at the second group of reasons, the living conditions, which mostly are about basic services such as water provision, food, electricity, housing. Let's ignore a bit the big column on the right because it's a very broad category we don't discuss right now. What we see is that all the other categories actually have very few respondents that named them, especially as first or second reason. And that is in contrast to what we found in the interviews, where actually in the interviews, several people said that they had big issues with water supply, food supply, electricity. And here are some quotes. Water had to be brought from long distances by us. We had to go up to 3 kilometers, says one. Or that the electricity supply was so unpredictable and mostly they didn't have any electricity. Also, the problem of a lack of food or nutritious food was discussed by many interviewees. And here one quote, the situation was such that we would have died due to starvation and hence we came to survive. So very strong reasons here with regards to the services. The largest group of reasons, as indicated by the household survey, were economic reasons. And when we look here in the more detailed graph, we see that employment actually dominates everything here. And generally, our interviews corroborated that. Almost all interviews mentioned that they were looking for jobs or better jobs or better income, sometimes for opportunities for themselves, sometimes to send money back to their villages. Here's one quote. The children had grown up. They would find a job here, so in the city, and we were tired of working in the farms, so we came. The second quote, I have to explain a little bit. Here, the respondent says, there was no rainfall. Nothing was getting cultivated. We didn't get work of daily wage in the village. So actually, when I asked the interviewee, why did you come to the city? She only told me because of jobs. And then I asked, okay, but what was your employment situation in the village? And she said, actually, I was a daily laborer on the farm, but we were all fired. And I asked her, okay, what happened? Why were you all fired? And she said, there were no yields on the farm. And then I asked, okay, why no yields? And she said, in that year, there was just no rain at all. So what we see is that the actual driving reason here was water scarcity or drought, but the more obvious reason that was stated was employment. A big surprise, I think, was when we looked at the household survey that very few people actually gave environmental reasons. If at all, then it was mostly related to water scarcity and drought. And as I said before, and with the previous quote, water scarcity and drought was a problem for many interviews, actually. I will show a bit more on that in a minute, and here's another quote. Everywhere was drought, like there was nothing to eat. At my parents' farm, all animals died because of no food. After that, all left the village and came here to Pune. So here we have a connection between water scarcity, drought, and food supply, which could have been maybe mentioned in the survey under the housing and livability or housing and living group of reasons. So we see that all those reasons are really complex and intertwined, and that a very standardized way of asking for reasons is not appropriate to capture them. Now let's have a more dedicated look at vulnerability questions to move towards the main topic of our session. When asked about the situation at origin, now we already heard quite a bit about water scarcity and drought. In fact, half of the interviewees suffered from drought, water scarcity, and that was given as one of the reasons to come to the city. Beyond that, many respondents explained how they were really confronted by extreme poverty in the village, and that there was such a low level of basic services that they really had very low coping capacity, and that the quote on the right side says it actually well: "We were not getting water to drink, that's why we came here. If at least I have money, then I can buy water, but we didn't get money also in the village." So they also couldn't compensate for lacking basic services because they also didn't earn enough money for that.
Sorry, Raphael, I think you're not reading the messages. Your time is a little bit up already for a while.
Okay.
So if you could move to the conclusions, it would be great. Okay. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, sure. We speed up and come to the conclusion. Because now this is more about the paradox. When people came to the city, actually, they were also confronted with environmental hazards and also other hazards. 14 of the 24 interviewees suffered flood damage in the city. And ironically, many of them actually had come because of water scarcity beforehand. I speed up here now. And maybe we also speed here up. Maybe this is interesting. We want to say that very quickly. This is our final slide.
Yeah, we can say quickly here that we wanted to see whether being affected by a flood differs according to an interviewee's migration status or zone type. And here we can say that migrants are 3 times more affected by floods than non-migrants, and that households in slums are also the most affected type.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is now our discussion slide. Basically, we can leave it open or bring it up later again. What we see is that, yes, environmental factors do play a role in migration, and that the type of vulnerability changes from slow to rapid onset, and that migrants did say that they can cope better in the city with flooding than with drought in the village. So this is the question, do we have a paradox or not? And we are happy to discuss that with you. Thank you very much, and sorry for the prolonged presentation.
Thank you very much, Raphael, for the presentation. Does anyone have any question for Raphael and Anne?
Perhaps you can have in the end then a more comprehensive discussion, also including the presentation. Yeah, also putting them in contrast perhaps to other presentations.
Yeah, and so far there are no questions from the chat, so I suggest we simply move on with the next talk.
Okay, thank you again, Raphael. And now I will move to Maria Partidário. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Shall I?
Sorry, I will write you in the messages when your time is 5 minutes up. I don't know if you could get the message.
I'm not sure that I will be able to see the message when I'm sharing the screen, but I'll try. In any case, okay. I'm in contact with Isabel through WhatsApp, so she can help me. Right. Okay, you're seeing my screen now? Right, so thank you very much. Trying to get rid of this here. No, okay. So our presentation is about the multi-governance approach that we've been adopting in the Lisbon metropolitan area within the Robust project for building a sustainable and resilient metropolitan region. And as I mentioned, I mean, there's several in the team, but this presentation will be shared by myself and by Isabel, who will bring some interesting examples that are revealing strongly the resilience in face of COVID times. Right, so just a short introduction on the Robust project. The Robust is about understanding interactions and dependencies between rural and peri-urban urban areas, to look into policies, governance models, and practices that enable those beneficial relations, and to improve governance for synergies across these different territories. And this is going to be exactly about the governance dimension. The Robust project is coordinated by Wageningen University by Professor Han Viskerke, and it includes 11 different countries or member states with various partners. These various partners bring together research and practice partners, and Lisbon metropolitan area is one of the areas that is taken as a study area, and which brings together the Regional Development Authority in Lisbon metropolitan area and our team at Técnico. The idea of the living labs is to use these place-based case studies that, with the purpose of engaging both practitioners and local stakeholders to co-create solutions, to explore, look into problems, considering the challenges, and actually come up with solutions to problems. In parallel with these living labs, the Robust project also addresses 5 thematic issues, which we call the communities of practice. And in Lisbon metropolitan, we consider 3 COPs. We have the businesses, the new businesses, and labor markets, the sustainable food systems, and ecosystem services. Now, for the Lisbon Living Lab, the main objective is, well, to address the topic of the project, reinforce and improve the value of rural-urban linkages through the combination of the 3 COPs that we adopt, the business models, the sustainable food systems, all in order to enhance ecosystem services. And we want to test bottom-up solutions and promote good practice. For that purpose, I mean, we started, it's been a long process with putting and bringing stakeholders together. But at this moment, we have managed to establish an interesting arrangement with 2 working groups that involve multiple and relevant stakeholders. One is looking particularly into sustainable food school or sustainable food programs in school. And the second group is looking into a network of sustainable initiatives that are driven by ecosystem services. We call this our sort of governance model, the Urban Rural Dynamics Laboratory, URP, and its main motto is to enhance territorial cohesion from within. So to bring bridging metropolitan communities and economies for improved urban-rural synergies, and we base this on 3 main elements: policy, education, and partnership. This URD lab is trying to, or we have 2 main innovations in our research agenda with this URD lab. One is to restore the community scale, as within the Lisbon metropolitan area. There has been an evolution that, in terms of the territory, that is rather disconnected in terms of what happens at regional as well as local, with a strong hierarchy, with the regional sort of setting up the context and the orientations and the normative for what happens at the local levels. And with this, we're trying to experiment new forms of governance by promoting proximity skills, knowledge share, construction of trust networks, a sense of belonging, and active bottom-up agendas, which means that we're trying to engage with local partners, local stakeholders, not only municipalities, but also associations and other type of stakeholders, to take action and to collaborate and generate this kind of initiatives that we need to restore this community scale. And at the same time, promote a participatory mapping of local values that support these new forms of governance, like connecting economic activities, working with green infrastructures, and manage multiple aspirations and expectations of the community. So we set up these two main groups, the group one on sustainable food in schools and the group two on network of sustainable territorial initiatives. And each of these big groups is then disaggregated in sub-activities that look into, for example, sustainable food supply and public procurement. These two joint efforts and are led by national public administration stakeholders, which I will describe in more detail, but it makes quite a significant innovation in terms of how we get this public, and I'm now thinking about Jenna presentations, very interesting to connect to this. So public administration making an effort to get out of what is their traditional way of, and the slowness of public administration, and to work namely with a person from a local association of food factors that they are working together, namely to set up a public procurement system to promote sustainable local food supply. And then there's another subgroup which is totally dedicated to create programs for education for sustainable food, and this one led by a local authority, or actually a sub-level of the municipality at the parish level. The other group on network of sustainable territorial initiatives is divided in 3 different topics, which are extremely complementary, and they are driven by ecosystem services. One is the green infrastructure group, which takes green infrastructure as an approach to map and understand the dynamics of ecosystem services. Another one is the AgroParks network that intends to connect also to food systems, and business models, to address ecosystem services from very much the perspective of the food provision. And then a third group, which aims to look into the territorial economy based on ecosystem services. So what kind of businesses are developing that have ecosystem services at the bottom? And all of these, in this case, all of these groups are led by municipal actors. So actors of the municipalities that are able to lead these processes. We have multiple types of factors. I, of course, do not have time to detail, but I thought that I should maintain this just so that you can read and get the perception that we're engaging all types of actors, from community actors to market, so private actors, public administration, academia, and third sectors. And these represent not only national, but also regional and local levels. And this diagram tries to represent the 36 different institutions that we've managed to get engaged into this process, and that, as you can see, represent multi-levels of intervention or of interest as well. And so at the local level, as you might see in the municipalities, we have almost all municipalities within Lisbon metropolitan areas involved at this point. So in terms of the governance arrangement, basically this has been, or we see this very much as a collaborative laboratory of experimental practices, self-organized with a lot of autonomy. They themselves, through action plans, they engage to reach out to new individuals. So they keep aggregating new individuals. And in fact, us as project team, we're facilitators, but we're almost observers of what the dynamics that is going on, which is extremely interesting. They follow process and outcome-oriented perspectives, and they very much share the regional priorities, which is something that, in a way, it's very interesting because they meet around a number of aspects that are common to all of them. And that's one of the things that helps motivating their activity. So they have action plans. They are accountable and responsible through those action plans, even though they have quite an informal way of acting. The participation is open and free and quite transparent. There are those various engagement moments. This is just an illustration of when we've had several moments through workshops, regional workshops, local workshops, thematic workshops, to exactly influence the construction of the production of knowledge and construction process to reach out to solutions. And this process enables generation of the legitimacy of the solutions that come up. As I was mentioning, these are non-structurally formalized. The responsibilities are rather informal, but they are totally assumed by the leader and co-leader. The persons are, or the participants are, extremely interested in getting engaged in these informal partnerships. And what is very relevant is that most of these connections are based on the will and trust between the various different stakeholders, and also with a robust team. And maybe this is part of the paradox, despite all this informality, we're still able, or they are still able, and to create or generate capacity to influence decision makers by the initiatives that are being undertaken, by the pressures that are putting on the system, and also by the solutions that are being generated and that may be able to come upstream and influence the decision makers. And here I share and I pass on to Isabel, so that Isabel can give you an example of this the resilience within this context in face of COVID-19. Isabel.
Maria, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The thing is that the time is already over and we still have one presentation. And the thing, if Isabel talks right now, we will not have time for the last presenter, which would be a pity. And also not time for questions.
Will be very quick.
1 minute.
Okay, Isabel.
Okay, so just to present an example of resilience that we have observed in our living lab and this sustainable food system lens that we have used. I mean, in this COVID times, much of the system has been disturbed, and the actors had to find different ways of arranging themselves. And so we have been observing that as well. So this is our COVID timeline in Portugal. So from the lockdown, from a kind of a partial situation where everything was closed, to then reopened everything again, and we are back into a partial lockdown. And so we looked at different actors in this scene. And looking especially to the food lens and how urban-rural relationships have been established, or newly established or reinforced, we have found three types of situations. So intensification of existing ones, diversification of existing businesses from different sectors that came together into the food system because they were out of business, and others on innovation that started completely new in this time. Next one. So one of the examples is a food network where we can see exactly like the number of baskets that they are selling. That is very much in line with the timeline of the COVID. So people started to have more demand, they started to reply. They were able to keep it up through the phase where we had less cases, and now they're again getting really up again in the new phase. Also others that have kind of found ways of that existed, and they have found ways to introduce box schemes where they had none, where they had home delivery services where they had none. And some of them were not successful, but others, especially those that came together from the tourism sector that has been declining in COVID time, they have been quite strengthened in this context. And also public innovation. So one of the public and the role we have discussed here, the role of the public here, the public role has been of creating this platform, bringing the farmers together where they could not sell, and kind of establishing a kind of a new meeting point and matchmaking. And this has been put together in 2 weeks, and it has almost 900 subscribers in the beginning, and it is increasing. And others that found new partnerships that had been developed where people that did not really work together but found different ways of providing new services, of getting tradition and identity to the people, for instance, to digital fairs of products, of wine and whatever. So these were kind of the conclusions of this experience. But I think in this context of this session specifically, I think that the paradox can be found on one way. COVID exposed the paradox and the food paradox, where we have 40% of farmland in the metropolitan area of Lisbon, but then everything goes around the world, one export and the others import and buy it. So it exposed that paradox. On the other hand, it also brought light on what is the paradox of the different kinds of arrangements and government's arrangements in the metropolitan area of Lisbon, and where sometimes you have to release regulation to be able to free all the actors to find new networks and new connections to overcome this crisis. And especially focusing on the agriculture, I think it's very astonishing that food and agriculture has been so disconnected, and it shows very much that paradox as well. Thank you so much for having the time.
Thank you very much. Sorry for time taking.
Thank you, Isabel. We have time for one burning question, if there is one. So I was talking with Christian. We suggested that maybe after the meeting today, we can engage somehow with another meeting or exchanging emails, because there was not really time for discussion, and we still have the last presenter, Thomas.
Yeah, I will make it as short as possible. That's a great thing by online conferences. You can kick out slides during the way, because I know Christian knows that I love to talk quite a lot, and so I have 6 slides. One is introduction, and the first slide. What I would like to show you, present you, is much like a sum up of the overall session, I would say, which is usually the job by Christian and Mariana. I would like to go back to the first presenters, mainly to interconnect with him. And let's see if I can also switch on my video. I will again talk about flood risk management, not the disaster of my room here. If you can see it, that's a really disaster because of the lockdown. And I would like only to focus on one paradox. This is a question about social justice. Everyone thinks about, okay, social justice is already part of resilience, which might be the case for the academia debate, but for the professional implementation of resilience, how to implement resilience and flood risk management, it's not always that the case. They have a slightly different understanding. So what is resilience? As we already know, it is something, I would say, a core topic in the last couple of years. It's increased, I would say, in the mid-2000s. It's popped up after the, would say, definitely of the flood site project in an FP6 project, and is nowadays everyone talking about resilience with a definition, without any definition. And in flood risk management, as my experience from a couple of research projects, it's always two core points. We have the bounce back or the bounce forward, and the question is what we go. The classical bounce backwards is, okay, we would like to go as fast as possible to the pre-disaster situation. So let's rebuild the street or the highway or the campus as much as possible. Or the other debate is much likely is what also Christian said, the second wave is the bounce forward, whatever bounce forward means and how we can conceptualize or implement. I would add another paradox that Christian might had in his mind. At the moment, we have so many indicators, tools, decision support system, and so on and so on. I'm also producing loads of this paperwork. And the thing what we realize is definitely a lack of people, so it's a lack of resources, that we have on one side great tools, but the other side is still one person who needs to deal with the whole crap what we are producing at the university. So it means, okay, we're producing nice things, but nobody is able to find this data or also to close this data. So today is a little bit what I wanted to show, but really short is what is the interpretation and resilience in flood risk management in Austria. That's definitely bounce backwards. So it means going back to this previous situation. And this has a tremendous impact of social justice, because what does it mean going bounce backwards? It's we have no changes, as Christian said, in the root causes. That's a term from Ben Weisner. I would say, okay, there's still the same socio-political inequalities, not even touched on the ground or solved or overcome it. So to go into the three questions that Mariana and Christian is sending around. Okay, the first question is, what kind of implication has resilience? This is a term that's not on me, so it's on Christian, and I'm only a really small core for this paper. We came up with the term, okay, resilience in flood risk management. One of the definition and understanding is that we observe a strong behavioral turn. That means that not the classical, the government is taking the core responsibility of flood risk management, but more individuals, private house owners, companies should take care about it. And that's discussion we say to definitely pop up much more like from 2000 onwards, particularly the Elbe 2002 flood events or the Danube flood events in Austria. We've seen something similar also in the UK after 2007. So it's nowadays a lot of policy documents at the international, but also the national level. It's a strong focus on we need to encourage individuals to take part of it. The second problem, what we see is this is fast return towards slow healing. Slow healing, it's not my term, is coming from Elon Kalman. Came up with a nice introduction because what this means, usually policymakers, but also individuals want to come back as fast as possible. So it's to rebuild the house, rebuild the streets, reopen everything, which is also in the COVID-19, the same thing. The other side, we have this slow healing process, which means, for example, what we have seen in a study in Nepal after the earthquake, is there is no change in the vulnerability if you go in this fast response, but maybe in 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, it might get over the situation. This is the huge conflicts between what individuals want to see in terms of going back, or can they really change anything in the current system? And the question is, okay, who gains and who loses? Also, if you go in this fast return or in a slow return, because that means strong implications, not on the socio-political issue, but also on the universal side per se. What we came up with is, so I would say, it's called a social equity paradox. Why I'm telling you something like that? In the middle, there were some other slides I kicked out. In flood risk management, many things are defined over the physical vulnerability, I would say. In particular, for the public administration, we have cost-benefit analysis, we have disaster compensation payments, and etc., which the main proxy or the main data set are the building and the content. It's not like social vulnerability indicators are used actually in a practical decision, in the final decision, whom we are getting to protect, whom we are getting to compensate. What we know from the literature is that that's a clear problem, because usually this most vulnerable group, and we know it from 2007 in the UK, but also in the United States, that in particular this group are usually more suffering from flood events, because in many areas across the globe, they are usually living in the floodplain area because it's cheaper than outside the living. And the second thing, they are often also discriminated by this policy way. Why is that the case? Because the main factor are physical vulnerability. And if you own a Rolls Royce, you get much better off than, for example, if you have no car, not for a voluntary reason, because you have no money. It's usually that the private communities are less in favor. And what we know also, these groups are usually also get plant relocated. That means it's an extra burden on that issue. That's not only they get nothing, no, they get even kicked out from the area, not for great idea to reduce vulnerability, no, because it's cheaper to kick them out instead of providing and them. The second question, what we came up with are the advancements regard to operationalization. And what I'm saying, going back to the first question, this behavioral turn in the practical situation in Austrian flood risk management is interpreted and defined and implemented often as resilience is to reduce the vulnerability. Some people would say 1 minus vulnerability is resilience, which is for us in the academia world nonsense. We see it much broader, but for the political policymakers, this is a clear message. Okay, we take some measures so we can increase resilience and everything is fine. So the focus is on building codes, local adaptation strategies, and so on and so on. But the question, and again, why this links again with the social justice, is we have some people that are not only not interested to do it, as Christian knows from his previous research, but also in ours, there are some people who say, well, I don't care about it. But we have also seen that there are many people that cannot afford it. It's too expensive. And not only too expensive, they don't have the resources as a person, they don't know what to do with, and sometimes they have no legal requirements. They are renting, so they are not really can implement certain things. What is the situation then? And that's going back to another paradox, is that also the public administration says, well, okay, that's not feasible or political feasible, so therefore we do nothing. So we provide some really nice paperwork, but in the end of the day, we're not implementing it. And that's the case in Austria. So the conclusion is, should we integrate social equity, social justice, and then resilience? Yes, we should, but actually, in the context of the policymakers, there's a huge gap that's not always in there. So saying, well, they see resilience as a quite straightforward situation, as a bounce backwards and focusing on physical vulnerability. And in fact, they don't care really about social disadvantage or social excluded groups, because they say, well, we don't care about much of them. And so I would say, let's stop it. Maybe there are some open questions. And sorry to sum up very quickly, but the time is quite advanced. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for the interesting presentation and for also giving this overview and answering the questions we made and giving some possible ideas to move forward. Does anyone have any question or comment to Thomas? There was a question in the app.
Yeah.
Sense of an overarching ambiguity in using terms of risk, vulnerability, and resilience through the entire discussion. I would be interested in discussing your approaches. So, discussion about the, the terminology we are using here. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I can start. Maybe the other ones won't go forward because I use quite a lot of these different terms. How I understand risk, it's usually in the work what I'm using is from the IPCC. It's a risk equation about the process, so frequency and magnitude, multiply vulnerability and exposure. So, but the key point is what is vulnerability, and we have at least quite different opinions. One, what I said is physical vulnerability, and physical vulnerability is the damage directly on the house. So if we have say no damage is 0% and 100% is the total damage, there is no house anymore, which is in the case in Austria quite important because we have some events that trying your home, and in the social vulnerability, it's more likely how individual shows the coping and adaptive capacity. Means are they socially excluded, have they the rights, etc. This is are they poor, low-income families, and so on. But the point is, what we realized at the moment that a couple of years ago I was quite fast and said, well, elderly people are more vulnerable. In fact, I'm nowadays much more careful because what we see in research is that these groups are much more resilient because they have better financial savings than compared younger people, because the young people bought a house, so the disaster arrived and destroyed their home, so they had no savings. So at the moment, I think it's a new step forward how to understand vulnerability, resilience, and how they interlink in the next couple of years. Well, Christian, what do you think?
I think it's time to wrap up.
Great.
So I think the good thing about this session was that everyone equally overused his or her time. So we are quite equitable in a sense. Thanks for your great presentations. I think I don't manage to do justice to all the details. I think I just now understood there are two different ways of looking at the presentation. I think the first one is what I would call the participation paradox. I think there was the first presentation was rather on seeing kind of how participation itself can lead to new unintended consequences that, so to say, powerful actors dominate the play. But I think also the case you presented on Portugal is a great example how it can have positive consequences in the sense collaboration, although not the intention was not to increase the resilience, it turned out that it was a byproduct of this participatory process, which is also quite a nice way of thinking about, so to say, paradoxes. I think the second presentation and the fourth presentation are both dealing with equity paradoxes in the sense of, I think, Raphael, your presentation was a perfect example of how, so to say, existing vulnerabilities are amplified through migration and by no means solved. So you are dealing with amplification processes, so to say, through migration, whereas Thomas was making the point that vulnerability, equity can also imply that those who are benefiting already or who are well off can even, so to say, increase more than previously if they are, so to say, receiving support after they recover for recovering for a flood event. I think I stop here because there's another great plenary session now starting. I think it kicks off right now, and I encourage you to participate there. If you think this was all very vague and blurred, I think that's part of the process. I'm really happy that you contributed here. I thank also all the listeners, and thanks for your question. I know we have been a little bit vague on the terminology, but please forgive us. I think that is part of the process of getting a common understanding is try to elaborate where we're coming from. So have all a great weekend and see you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will write you an email to follow up. And yeah, have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you for the great moderation.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.
Have a good day.